Hello and welcome back to the Scenario 7 podcast. My name is Sam and today I'm joined by my lovely co-host. It's Mr. Joe Roberts. Joe, how are you doing, mate?
I'm doing good, Sam. How are you doing?
I am good, and I know second race in a row we are bringing you a race review a week late. We're not going to make a habit of it. Again, I'm sorry, I've been really busy recently with uni work, but that has come to an end now. So we're going to be back. We're going to be bringing you stuff on time. That is a promise. But today we are here for Miami Grand Prix review at the Miami International Autodrome, the first ever race here. But let's start with qualifying. Joe, what did you think? Pretty uneventful, this one.
Yeah, it was uneventful. I think, as in probably get on later, I actually kind of liked the track because I kind of criticised it a lot in the preview to the race. So it was it seemed like a track mix between different old American circuits. But yeah, it seemed fast and yeah, it's some teams adapted it well, like the Ferrari and the Red Bulls, and then obviously in on the practice free for the Mercedes, you see the porpoising continuing. So, and then obviously they struggled in qualifying. So it was eventful in terms of certain cars outplaced, like Russell being P13 or P12, I think. And then obviously then you got Ocon being at the back. So it was, in that terms, I think it was exciting just to see how the Mercedes upgrades were doing.
Yeah, it is interesting because, of course, Mercedes did bring upgrades to Miami, and it seemed to have a positive effect on Hamilton, who ended up lining up in P6. But then you had George Russell in P12. So you're not really sure what happened. Was it that Russell wasn't used to the upgrades and Hamilton adapted well? So that was an interesting dynamic. Of course, Ocon couldn't set a lap in qualifying because of his shunt into the barriers. I'm going to bring that up again in a sec. But to round up qualifying, Stroll into Q3, that's a good development for him. I have criticised him a lot, but have always said that his strength is his race pace and his qualifying positions need to start matching it. Q3 for Stroll is definitely a good development. Hamilton P6 mentioned that. Verstappen, just one small mistake costing him pole. He just went too hard into a corner, lost the back end, and then knew his lap was over. But still a solid qualifying. It hasn't exactly cost him too much. And then Ferrari locking out the front row for the first time since Mexico 2019. Quite a big gap, but very impressive for them. Mentioning the Tech Pro barriers, Ocon did have a big shunt. Sainz also had a crash. Quite a few drivers, of course, new track, getting used to it, did end up in the barriers. And there were a lot of drivers complaining about a lack of Tech Pro barriers after the collisions in practice. And this wasn't changed for the race. And the positive of us doing this a week late is that I could hear that Russell has actually come out and has said that the drivers are going to be calling a meeting at Spain because they feel that the FIA are not listening to the drivers when it's coming to installing these barriers. Joe, what do you think about this? Because in my eyes anyway, safety has to come first. If anyone's going to know if they need these barriers, it's going to be the drivers.
Yeah, I do agree that these techno barriers should be in place. I think maybe it just was timing because you have to put it whole around the first sector, I think, or large parts of which then then you have to think of the safety because of the angle. If you hit the edge of the techno barrier, you're then gonna cause probably even more accident to yourself. So yeah, in that sense, I think the drivers should be listened to, and hopefully when we go to Miami next year, it'll be changed. But yeah, it's I think concerning that the FIA didn't just come out and say we'll change it next season's race, but we don't have time to do it this season.
Yeah, well, it's quite a big development for Norris saying that the drivers are going to actually meet about it at Spain because they feel like the FIA isn't listening to them. That is quite a big development. It'll be interesting to see what happens from that. But let's move on to the race on Sunday. Sorry, just going over some general thoughts first. What do you think of the race?
I thought it was quite boring until the last 15 laps. This track, I think, when these, I think, I don't know who designed it. They designed it as a kind of just like a hot lap, qualifying lap, and then when it comes to the race, it's literally so bad because it's so like DRS trains, and although it just makes it boring unless you have tire difference and people on soft, some on hards in front. That means it makes it more interesting. I thought the Red Bulls looked very strong, especially the straight line speed. It means that Ferrari potentially need to get their act together in order to restore that, I think, lead in terms of development that they had. And then you obviously had Russell going long, very good in the race, then obviously beating Hamilton. But then again, you have to give a question on strategy. Then Ocon from the back of the grid, coming 8th as well, which is a good result. And then obviously you got the Aston Martin, Lance Stroll finishing 10th. So it was, I think, a boring race, and then it made it more exciting 15 laps ago when the safety car come out. But apart from that, I would say it's kind of quite a boring race. And why I suggested last week, when the preview, which we should go to a different European track, like I said, Germany.
Yeah, Hockenheim would be great. But yeah, this track did show, it highlighted that, and it's not just this track because there are other tracks, the dependence on a safety car to just make it more interesting. And that is a massive issue because you need to design your tracks to be interesting, to allow overtaking without the need for someone to risk getting hurt in an incident or something like that. Of course, we did have that in this race and it did spice it up. So it's not as bad a race, in my opinion, as it could have been. But the dependence upon a safety car to spice up a race, I feel like isn't great. And that is a negative of this track. But after that safety car, there was a bit of action before it, as you said, DRS train, nothing really happened. It was quite a nice track visually. As you said, I think it's a decent track for qualifying, but for the race, didn't think it was great. And the TV director drove me insane. He didn't show any of the action. He just kept cutting to fans when action was going on, and that did drive me insane. But let's go into the incident report. So first of all, lap 7, Zhou Guanyu retired with a technical problem. On lap 39, Alonso looks up and hits Gasly up the inside going into turn 1. Alonso was awarded a 5-second penalty for this. Joe, do you agree with the FIA's decision?
Yes, yeah, I think it's very deserved. I think when you start, especially in these cars, because they're quite heavy, you dive bomb and then start brake and then start turning, obviously you got to lock up. And then obviously Gasly being quite far in front and on the left-hand side and not really, it's quite blind. It's going to be, it's not Gasly's fault. It's obviously going to be Alonso. As in you're the car overtaking, it's your responsibility to overtake in a safe manner.
Yeah, I was quite surprised that a driver of Alonso's experience was making such a risky move. I mean, he was so far back. And it was, as you said, a dive bomb. It was just a dive up the inside from a driver who was having a great race. And he basically ended up ruining Gasly, who then on lap 41, which we're going to talk about now, did hit Lando Norris after going wide after turn 7. Now, this brought out a safety car, and I know if Josh was here, he would be shouting very loudly, "It was Gasly's fault, it was Gasly's fault." But Joe, whose fault do you think it was? Because the FIA didn't hand out a punishment for this.
I personally think it should have been a grid position drop for Gasly, just because I think it was a very, or even some sort of fine for AlphaTauri. I think it's very unsafe for them to allow Gasly to go around that track with a broken car, basically a broken front wing. I think it was kind of unsafe, and obviously him going wide then basically made it worse because of the dust and the gravel, because it's such a new track. And then just didn't see Norris. I think if his car was perfectly fine and just went wide and it was just a bit clumsy, I think you can kind of forgive him for that. But just the fact he had a mechanical problem, he maybe should have been more aware. And as I'm just trying to think what I do, you would then suddenly look at your mirrors and check, maybe you just pull over off the racing line or slightly on it when Norris was going past.
I think it's a tough one because I've watched this incident over and over trying to make my decision. And at this point, I'm leaning towards agreeing with the stewards that it was a racing incident, because Gasly did go wide into the corner. He had damage on his car, of course, after the Alonso collision. But Gasly, to be fair, couldn't have gone too much further right. And Norris could have given him more room. I feel like Alonso, Norris coming at pace, could have been further to the left and should have seen Gasly going slowly and gone more left. It's a tough one. And that's why I'd lean towards a racing incident, because I couldn't call it either way. And that is, for me, why it was a racing incident. So I personally think that it was what the race needed, unfortunately. But yeah, Gasly, to punish him for that, or to punish Norris, would have been half. So for me, racing incident, which caused lap 46 Gasly to retire with damage. He probably should have retired before that, to be honest. And then after the safety car, there was just so many incidents. So on lap 47, Stroll and Magnussen were involved in an incident at turn 2. No further action required. The TV director didn't show it. So who knows what happened there. Lap 54, Schumacher shunted Vettel down the inside of turn 1. Now, this incident was shown and was deemed a racing incident. Joe, I know you disagree with this.
I think it's Schumacher. And I would say it's Schumacher's fault because he kind of went for the apex rather than trying to actually do an overtake. You could argue the Vettel. I can understand why it was a race incident, but I think it was just over that line in terms of the fact that Schumacher kind of dived at it but kind of just dived for the apex, which meant he basically locked up and then just smashed into Vettel, and obviously his race was completely over. So yeah, I would say it's 100% Schumacher's fault, but you can kind of see why the FIA gave it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was Schumacher's fault. However, Vettel did turn in very early with no awareness of where Schumacher was. So he should have been more aware that Schumacher was there. It wasn't like the incident with Alonso and Gasly, where Alonso was so far back and just dived down. Schumacher was a lot closer. And it's another one that's really tough. I don't know. There's so many incidents at Miami where I would struggle to give it either way. So I'm going to lean towards what the stewards decided, which was a racing incident. However, if someone was going to get a penalty, I agree with you, it would have been Schumacher, because I don't think he did enough to necessarily avoid the incident. I don't know. It's really tough. But then on lap 55, Vettel retired with damage. On lap 56, Stroll and Magnussen had an incident at turn 12. And there was a 5-second penalty for Magnussen, I think it was, not shown by the TV director. Ricciardo then also got a 5-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage, not shown by the TV director. Alonso cut the chicane and gained an advantage, 5-second penalty, not shown by the TV director. I mean, at the end of the day, there were so many punishments that were just given out to things we didn't see, Joe. I mean,
yeah, I was going to say, I don't remember. I remember the chicane one, but I don't remember them showing Ricciardo one, or even the Magnussen and Stroll one.
Yeah, well,
it's a bit as even, I don't know, as it goes back to the TV direct. I don't know why they would show fans. It's very, I think, a very American thing to do in terms of how they kind of run their TV direct in their motorsport, like NASCAR and IndyCar. But yeah, I don't understand why they didn't show these incidents.
Yeah, because there were so many incidents that the FIA were investigating after the race, and I just remember coming off of it, like, to look at my phone and being like, "What happened? Like, what are they investigating?" But to be fair, I did see the Alonso one on TikTok a few days after the race, and apparently he backed off afterwards to not gain an advantage, but they didn't think he backed off enough, apparently. But again, can't really see it because the TV directors weren't great. Let's move on to our team-by-team breakdown over the weekend, starting with Ferrari. And it's a weekend that was good, but could have been a lot better for them, I think it's fair to say. Leclerc putting his car on pole, finishing second, and Sainz starting second and finishing third. What do you think of their weekend?
I think it was a kind of mixture of both halves. I think, yes, it was not, I think, nice to get the front row, but I think they kind of wished Sainz got third, and just because that left-hand side was so grippy. I think most drivers who got a decent start were on the left, so they probably kind of wish Sainz was that, and then obviously get past Max that way. But yeah, it was kind of hard for the Ferrari boys at the beginning to try and fend off Max, because it's just a very narrow turn one, and then the race, I would say, was quite dull in terms of Ferrari, as in they pushed as hard as possible. They need to get more straight line speed in that car somehow, and Leclerc hoping for upgrades. I think in Spain, I don't know when the upgrades are coming, but they won the upgrade. So yeah, it was I think a mix. I think they've got the 1 lap pace. It's just getting the race pace out of their car to win against, I think, this turning into a machine of Red Bull with Max Verstappen in the car.
Yeah, as you said there, it's pretty solid, but Red Bull just have the straight line speed. And when you see the track has 3 DRS zones, it has a lot of these straights, then it's clear that Red Bull are going to have the advantage. And Verstappen did, to give credit to Leclerc, he did make a fight of it towards the end after the safety car. But Max did his job to keep him behind. And by that time, Leclerc had used all his ERS. He'd pushed as hard as he can go and ended up last few laps backing off. But he did put up a bit of a fight towards the end. And Sainz, nothing really happened with Sainz because he had Perez behind him, but Perez had issue, so couldn't push him. I mean, bar one dive down the inside, Sainz had a comfortable race. So not much to report there, but if I was Sainz, I'd be very happy with third place after how horrific the last 2 weekends were for him. So hopefully that ups his confidence a bit. Let's move on to Red Bull. They got the most points this weekend, getting 38, including the fastest lap. Max Verstappen starting third, finishing first, and Perez starting fourth, finishing fourth. And for me, it was really unfortunate for Perez because I back him all the time. And he could have got a podium here if he just didn't have that issue. Because I think I remember them saying in TV commentary that this issue has taken about 10, 20 miles an hour off him on the straights. So he just couldn't compete with the Ferraris. Even when he went onto a softer compound, he still just couldn't get past Sainz. So for me, that was frustrating from his point of view, because it could have made an interesting battle there. And I think he'd have won it. But then with Verstappen, very dominant weekend. If he didn't make a slight mistake in qualifying, then he's on the front row and wins the race more comfortably. But what do you think about Red Bull this weekend?
I think it was solid. As in, you would say a mixture of both halves. Again, Red Bull in terms there, I don't think their qualifying pace is up there. I would say Ferrari's still got that locked down in terms of performance. I think when we go to Spain and Monaco, I think that will be a tell if the Ferraris have improved in terms of I think that'd be more favourable tracks for Ferrari, but so it'd be interesting to see if Max and Perez out qualify Sainz and Leclerc around those tracks. But yeah, the Red Bulls look quick in a straight line. You haven't really seen them in through the corners, but it looks like they could, obviously cars help because they can follow. With Perez, I think it'd be a bit gutted not getting third in this race. I think he had this. I think I had a chance on one of the laps after the safety car to get Sainz. So from that point of view, I think it'd be a bit gutted. But obviously, you said the 20 miles an hour down, that power unit problem shows a bit of a concern in terms of the reliability of those Honda engines and power units. So yeah, it's a mixture of both. I think they'll be happy in terms of they've got the most points, and Max is now in a position to now win the title. So yeah, I think it's a positive, but also a negative in terms of just the reliability problems they have.
Yeah, well, as you said there, reliability is going to be the thing that holds them back this year, because they just can't seem to fix this problem. It seems to be a different problem every time, but it's always to do with their power unit, and it's something going wrong there, whether it's to do with the fuel feeding into it or just to do with power. It's an issue that they need to fix. But at the same time, they got a problem and they still finished fourth. The car that had the problem still finished fourth. So some really positive points there. And Verstappen winning, of course, does help with the fastest lap. Let's look at Mercedes now. And they did bring upgrades to Miami, the first set of upgrades. They're going to bring some more upgrades to Spain. They had George Russell qualifying 12th, and not a great result, but finishing 5th. And then Hamilton starting 6th, finishing 6th. Joe, how would you look at their weekend as a whole? And do you think these upgrades have improved the car, or is it too early to say?
I think it's too early to tell. I think just generally, I don't think Miami suits their car. Well, at the moment, I don't know what track suits their car. But I think looking at Lewis Hamilton in terms of him out qualifying Russell, I think that's a positive for him. Obviously, people are now arguing on Twitter that George Russell's finishing ahead of Hamilton away, and what it's just due to strategy. I don't think the Mercedes at the moment really care who's finishing first, because they're winners. They want to win races and, you know, compete for the championship. So I think it's just getting the max amount of points. I think if Lewis pit earlier when I think when Russell did, maybe could have been in a position to hold that P5. But overall, it's a solid weekend. I think it's foundation they can build on, but there's still problems with that porpoising, which hopefully they can fix around Spain, which obviously again is a testing track, so you can use the data from testing. But it'll be interesting if they go back to the testing Spain spec of concept, because I think, was it Spain or when they went to obviously Bahrain, had the one they're using currently now, it was a bit different and it hasn't worked out. So it'd be interesting, but overall it's too early to tell in terms of reliability, but hopefully it's a start.
Yeah, well, it was a great result for Russell, and for Hamilton, it's just him being really unlucky again, to be honest, because Russell did start on this hard compound tyre, which meant that he could go longer. And they were on the team radio, do you want to pit? And he was like, we'll hold out for a safety car. And he got that safety car. Meanwhile, Hamilton had to pit because he was on the mediums, so had to pit earlier. And he just got really unlucky again, meaning that Russell was on a newer tyre. He could attack Hamilton, and that's what he did. I can tell that Hamilton's very frustrated, even though he is doing these posts saying, great team effort. He's such a serial winner that we know he'll be very frustrated. But over the course of a season, I feel like luck will even out. It's still very early on. They're going to bring upgrades to Spain. If they work, then we could see them competing for podiums. Russell's been lucky, Hamilton's been unlucky, but at the same time, Russell, fair play, he chose the right strategy. But it'll be interesting to see as the season goes on how they do, because as much as they're being criticised, they're still weak. They're still third in the constructors. Like, it's not been a car crash. Like a few years ago, criticising Ferrari a lot when they were a lot further down, and Mercedes are getting this same level of criticism as Ferrari got, despite the fact they're still third in the constructors. It's not the end of the world. Upgrades in Spain will be interesting to see what happens. Let's now move on to McLaren, a team that after last week we said was on the up, and this week got no points. So what is going on with that team? Norris, of course, qualifying 8th, good qualifying position, did DNF, and then Ricciardo qualifying 14th after just being really unlucky with his quality. He couldn't get a clean run until the end, and by that time he couldn't do a great lap, and finishing 13th. What happened with McLaren this weekend?
It's, as a McLaren fan, it's quite hard to describe. I think it's a mixture of poor strategy, Lando having a really slow stop, and Ricciardo basically performing really badly in qualifying. I think in generally the McLaren, I think it's just a very weird car. It works at tracks. It's sometimes the third best car in front of Mercedes, and then other races it's like the 6th best car behind AlphaTauri. So I think it's just I think for them it's just trying to work out why is that, and then going from there. But I think the incident with obviously Norris didn't really help. I think they would have been in that fight for points, and being behind the Aston Martins, the two Aston Martins, I don't think really helped either. And obviously being behind the DRS train, it's impossible to pass unless you dive and cause a crash.
Yeah, of course, it was just unlucky with Norris this weekend because, as you said, he did have a slow stop as well. I don't think he was going to get points, but he'd have definitely been around the points positions, and then just getting that DNF, very unlucky. And then Ricciardo is just a driver that for the second season in a row, you just don't know what you're going to get with him. He's such a likable driver that you just want him to do well. And it's clear that he has this talent. He's an incredibly talented driver, but it's just for some reason not really working out for him at McLaren at this point. Let's look at Alfa Romeo, where they are being carried by one driver still, but very unlucky for their second driver quite often this season. So Valtteri Bottas is the man carrying, qualifying fifth, which is a very impressive start for them. I think it's Alfa Romeo's one of their best qualifying positions, and then seventh in the race after a bit of getting close to the wall, a bit of an incident which let the two Mercedes through, and then Zhou Guanyu starting 17th and then DNFing just with an engine failure. So you can't really judge him too much. And the amount of times that Zhou's just been incredibly unlucky this season has been tough for him. But how do you look at Alfa Romeo this weekend?
As again carried, I think it's Bottas has turned into the Gasly role, as I'm going to call it, from last season. I think Bottas is kind of flourishing under Alfa Romeo, and again, as I said last week or last review, Bottas is showing why he is a quick driver because he's pulling everything out of that Alfa Romeo, and arguably he could have been in front of the Mercedes this race, except from that, obviously, that mistake that allowed Russell and Hamilton through, I think. So it's an interesting one. Guan Yu Zhou, I think he's just a bit of, I think, again, raw talent. Just needs to be nurtured and just needs some luck. But yeah, it's going to be interesting how far Alfa Romeo go, and if they can keep developing the car to maybe get in front of McLaren. I think that'll be their aim, because obviously, again, going back to Ricciardo, hasn't really performed. You don't know what performance you get out of him. So it could be a very good season for Bottas and Alfa Romeo.
Yeah, it is putting egg on my face a bit after predicting the two drivers 19th and 20th. So they're outperforming my expectations quite significantly, I think it's fair to say. Let's look at Alpine now. And it was an interesting weekend for them because they had Esteban Ocon, who started the race 20th after a big shunt in practice 3, so he couldn't go out in qualifying, but then rescued 8th, so up 12 positions. And then you had Fernando Alonso, who started 11th, gained loads of places, but then kept getting penalties for making mistakes and finished 11th. So how do you look at Alpine this weekend?
I think it'd be positives. I think that Alpine have been quite weak this season at the start. I think there's been kind of just not in the conversation in terms of being the top four team. So because obviously McLaren, and then you got Alfa Romeo being that team, and obviously maybe Haas as well. So yeah, as in Alpine, I think just going quietly about their business, and Ocon with a very good recovery drive. I don't know what's happening with this Alpine power unit or Renault power unit. It's kind of let them down, and obviously the mistake in practice 3 as well. So Ocon, I think, is showing why he should be in F1, and is also learning off Fernando Alonso as well in terms of like nurturing the car, nurturing the tires, and being patient and waiting for that chance. And then I think Alonso just had a bit of a shocker in terms he could have easily got points, but kind of fluffed it a bit.
Yeah, well, Ocon did come under a bit of criticism last weekend, because he was asked on team radio to back the cars up behind him so that Alonso could get enough of a gap to stay in the points with his 5-second penalty after the original Gasly collision. What do you think about Ocon not listening to team orders? Is that a bad sign that he's disobeying the team, or is that just him looking after his own race and just trying to get the best points possible?
I think it's, I don't know. Was he in front of Bottas?
I think he was in front of Albon, I want to say.
Okay, yeah. So maybe you could argue Albon would be an easier opponent to try and back up. But then again, there's two DRS that are quite long. And obviously, if you don't have that DRS and your power unit isn't particularly that quick in a straight line. So I understand why he didn't do it. And I kind of agree with him. I think he just needs to protect his own race from starting from the back of the grid.
Yeah, I would agree. And of course, Alonso in the end got another penalty anyway, so wouldn't have got points. AlphaTauri next, and 0 points for them this weekend, with Yuki Tsunoda qualifying 9th, good result, but finishing 12th, and Gasly 7th to DNF. I mean, Gasly just had a bit of a nightmare race, didn't he?
Yeah. As in, I remember you put in on the our group chat that Matt's going to be a bit annoyed with his fantasy choice with him having Gasly and Norris out. But yeah, as in, I think Gasly, I remember seeing pictures of him at the Miami Dolphins. He's going to be wishing he just stayed in that NFL stadium or training ground area, because he had a shocker, had a very good qualifying, and then just didn't do very well in the race. And then Tsunoda, I can't remember how. I think the safety car basically just screwed him over a bit, because he would have potentially been ahead of the two Aston Martins, and then obviously the Williams as well, because they just didn't pit.
Yeah, I did feel bad for Matt this weekend, having Magnussen, Gasly and Norris all DNF, especially after bringing Gasly and Norris just for this weekend. So feel bad for him there, but we'll talk more to Matt on the fantasy show coming in a few days. Let's look at Haas now. Kevin Magnussen, the man who's done really well this year, 16th to DNF, and Schumacher 15th to 16th. Again, not a great weekend for Haas.
Yeah, no, I kind of think now it's just, this is the true pace of their car. I think we got a bit too hyped. Whereas I think that, as you face going there, I think that Haas is a very track dependent car. As in, like, obviously Bahrain was very up their streak, and then obviously then the round two at, I can't remember what,
Saudi Arabia
just suited their car. I think Mick could have got points if he just wasn't stupid and kept his head together. But apart from that, I think Haas just had very torrid weeks, starting P15 and 16.
Yeah, as you said, their car does look very track dependent, because they have had some great results, but then they had Australia where they didn't do very well, and then here again they didn't do great. To be fair to Magnussen, he was fighting for points, but he kept doing stupid things and just ended with him DNFing, which, to be fair, sounds quite a bit like the Kevin Magnussen of old. Let's look at Aston Martin now. And they got a point this weekend after all the penalties were registered in. They had Sebastian Vettel, who started in the pits and ended up DNFing. And then Lance Stroll also starting in the pits to P10. Is it a worry that their issue before the race was the fact that they didn't warm the fuel up properly, or they didn't warm the fuel up in time? Now, that seems like a very rookie mistake to me, because that should be one of the first things you do.
Oh no, they over that, as in the reason I think they had to stay in the pits, because it has to be under a certain temperature, and they exceeded it. No, it was either under or over. They just exceeded it way too much, and they basically had to call it down.
I think it was the opposite way around. I think it was under, and they had to warm it up. But whatever, sounds like a rookie mistake. So which ended up costing them a good start, and those cars basically ended up being Vettel and Stroll ended up just being bollards for the whole race to prevent other cars getting through. But Aston Martin getting a point after a pretty bad start to the race with them starting in the pits, not bad.
Yeah, I think they'd be satisfied. Obviously, Vettel would have got points if Schumacher didn't crash him out. But yeah, I think Lance Stroll and Vettel, considering they started at the back, they kind of basically hold everybody up, just trying to wait for a safety car to happen. I think that was their only hope of getting into the points, and then obviously then achieved it when the safety car came out, and then got into the points that way. So yeah, so it's a very successful weekend for them. It's in terms of them in the car. In terms of out of it, I think it was very. I don't know who it was. Kraft, is it the
Mike
principal?
Crack.
Mike Crack needs to work on. I think the mechanic. I don't know how they made that mistake. It's as you said, a very rookie error, and it shouldn't really happen in an F1 team. You kind of imagine that in F2, but yeah. They need to sort those little issues out, because they're having problems with the mechanics in terms of pit stops, and then it just not very good.
Yeah, it's not great at all. But in the car, as you said, definitely some positives. They seem to have found some race pace and some quali pace, which I'm not sure where that was for the first few races of the season. After, to be fair, potentially thinking that they were going to be the team that came last. But now they're starting to pick up some points, and they're ninth. So they're not even sitting at the bottom. The team sitting at the bottom is Williams, with drivers Alex Albon 18th to 9th, getting 2 points, and Latifi 19th to 14th. And Latifi, they just never show on the TV because he just doesn't do anything. He's just kind of there. But Albon, another very good drive, 18th to 9th. Joe, I'm pretty sure I've asked you this before. Is the Williams car a midfield car, but Latifi's just not very good, or is Albon performing miracles?
I think their cars level on pace with the Haas and the Aston Martin. I would say that. So I think it'd be a lower midfield. I do think Alex Albon is performing miracles in that car. But Latifi, as I said a number of times, is I think getting a bit wane on that car. I think it's turning into a bit of a liability in terms of performance and helping Alex out. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's replaced. I know it's to do with money, and has a rich Canadian family, but I think it will get to a point where his money won't save his seat. He needs to start performing, and I don't think it will continue in Spain.
Yeah, well, it's nice that we don't have what we had last year, where we had Haas, who were just never going to get any points. At least this year, even the team at the bottom got 2 points this weekend. There's actually a bit of a battle going on at the bottom, at the top, in the midfield. It's very interesting. And with car developments going on through the year, teams at the bottom could end up going up, but having Latifi in your car might not get you that improvement, because you're very reliant on Alex Albon, who is doing a great job. And there were a lot of rumours this week that De Vries was going to replace Latifi. They turned out to be false, but there's murmurs. There's a lot of rumours that he's going to lose his seat. I think that if he loses his seat, it'll be at the end of the season because I think they need his funding for this year. But a lot of pressure on Latifi, and he does need to start performing. But yeah, Albon, another great drive. Fair play to him. Now let's move on to driver of the day. Joe, who have you gone for?
I think there's a number you could have gone for. Alex Albon. You could have gone for Mick if he didn't hit Vettel. I think you could either gone for the two Aston Martins, but I've gone for Ocon, who started at the back and finished 8th. A very solid drive, and is kind of growing into that Alpine role and shutting up the critics that obviously we've criticised him a lot. I think Josh has.
I haven't. I've always been an Albon fan, Ocon fan, not an Albon.
I think Josh has criticised him, but he's shutting those people up that doubted him, and is putting pressure on Alonso, which is good, which is obviously good for the team. So I'll go for Ocon for that very nice performance.
Yeah, shutting up the haters. That's why Josh isn't on the podcast. He's hiding because Esteban Ocon is just doing so well. He's hiding. He's embarrassed. But moving on to my driver of the day, I have gone for one of the Mercedes drivers. It's George Russell. I think I've gone for him for a second week in a row. And I'm going to use the stat again. He's the only driver to finish in the top 5 every race. Which, again, if you consider it's in the Mercedes, which has been so inconsistent and so unreliable this year, fantastic results. Starting 12th, he made a fantastic start and then had a great battle with Hamilton. Of course, he got lucky with a safety car, but it was his call to stay out and wait for one. So you've got to give him credit for that. And then as soon as the safety car comes out, he came in, he had a massive advantage on Lewis and got some great points for the team. And just really positive race result from Russell. I was very close to going for Albon, but in the end, I went for George Russell. And that wraps up our podcast reviewing the Miami Grand Prix. First race here is now finished, and it was a fine start. It happened. The race did happen, but it's fine. We're moving on to Spain in a week's time. We will bring you a preview. We'll bring you some F1 fantasy show, and make sure to look out for that. But yeah, make sure to like, subscribe, comment your driver of the day. Our links are all in the description for our social media to stay on top with everything we have on. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.